Aloha, half a day, everybody. I'm Brad Romine. I'm the Deputy Director of the University Consortium of the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center, or PI-CASC. I'm also a coastal scientist with the University of Hawaii Sea Grant. For anyone joining us for the first time for our PICASC, Slice of PICASC seminar series, PICASC is a collaborative partnership between the U.S. Geological Survey and a university consortium hosted by University of Hawaii at Manoa with the University of Hawaii at Hilo and University of Guam, designed to support sustainability and climate adaptation in communities across the Pacific Islands. Through PICASC, we provide natural resource managers and cultural stewards in federal, state, and local arenas access to the best science available on climate change and other stressors impacting the region's natural and cultural resources. Emphasizing cooperative efforts between researchers and managers, we aim to create actionable science and accessible products to use on real problems. This Slice of PICASC seminar series provides a platform for sharing ongoing and state-of-the-art climate adaptation research and science to management applications in Hawaii and the US-affiliated Pacific Islands and beyond. You probably got to notice this presentation is being recorded. It will be available on our PICASC website under news and events if you'd like to go watch it or share with anybody afterwards. We ask that you please keep your microphones on mute during the presentation. Please do leave questions in the chat during the presentation. We will have time for questions following the presentation, and we'll address the questions that come through in the chat at that time at the end of the talk. At the conclusion of our seminar, we ask you to please complete a short survey to help us in planning future PICASC seminars. The survey will pop up just after you log off of Zoom from the talk. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Romina King. In addition to being the PICASC lead at the University of Guam, Romina is an associate professor of geography at the Micronesian Area Research Center at the University of Guam and chair of the University of Guam Masters of Science Environmental Science program. Dr. King is also the vice chair of the Guam Climate Change Resilience Commission and associate director of NASA Guam Space Grant. She has a very interesting international and interdisciplinary education and research background with a PhD in geography from University College Cork in Ireland, a Master's of Science in Geographic Information Systems from the University of Southampton in the United Kingdom, MA in Micronesian Studies from the University of Guam, as well as a Bachelor's of Science in Economics from Boston College. Her research interests include natural resource management, coastal zone management, coral reefs, GIS, remote sensing, climate change, adaptation, and vulnerability, particularly in Guam, Micronesia, and Oceania. Prior to her current stint in academia, Dr. King worked as a GIS analyst for the government of Guam Environmental Protection Agency before transferring to their coastal management program. She was also a NOAA Coastal Reef Conservation Fellow for 2 years and created a successful program called Guardians of the Reef, where local students are educated about the importance of coral reefs. Guardians of the Reef is currently in its 15th year, and prior to COVID, every single third grade classroom on Guam was visited by older guardians to learn about coral reefs. Dr. King also wrote and produced a highly acclaimed puppet show starring a young chicken who perceived himself as an endangered Guam cocoa bird, learning about how trash can make its way through a watershed and end up on a coral reef. Romina was born in the Philippines and raised in New York. She moved to Guam shortly after her undergraduate degree for an environmental consulting job. She loves to surf and kiteboard, but has done very little of that in the past years, as her free time is mostly occupied with wrangling her adorable children towards pathways that guide them to be kind grown-ups that contribute to our society. She has an extensive collection of children's literature and Japanese stationery products. She can also recite the Greek alphabet, a skill that's particularly handy in this time of COVID, I think. Romina has some special guests joining her during her presentation today. We'll let Romina introduce them when she's ready. So Romina, Sidios Mase, mahalo for agreeing to speak with us today. I'll pass it over to you. Please take it away. Thanks.
Can everyone hear me and see my screen okay? Half a day, and see you, Smasi Brad, for that warm welcome and lovely introduction. I'm so honored to spotlight one of our main programs at PI-CASC University of Guam. It's called CARM. So CARM stands for Climate Adaptation for Resource Management. It's a PICASC program at the University of Guam that uses this unique model of science co-production between academic researchers and natural resource management agencies. And why CARM? Like, why is this program even necessary? Well, have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you were expressing yourself as clearly and eloquently as possible? The conversation is flowing, both parties are talking, and then bam, the person that you are talking to says something or does something that clearly indicates they didn't understand at all. Well, you've just experienced a communication failure or a total disconnect. And these communication failures happens to natural resource managers all the time. And it can be so frustrating. Briefly, these are some of the reasons why these disconnects happen. Sometimes there's too much talking or too much jargon. As we grow older, we become more experienced, we settle into our niche, and we start using the language of our academic or our professional discipline. And I'm really guilty of this myself. If a topic really excites me, like GIS, I can just go on for hours and hours and never stop and use all sorts of lingo and acronyms. And by then, the other person's eyes have glazed over, and then they're gone. They're just gone, right? So, I think resource managers and academics are definitely guilty of that. Another reason why I've observed why there's communication failure is sort of personal bias, right? If we disagree with what's being communicated, it's really hard to listen with an open heart and an open mind. One tends to tune that person out, especially if they're saying something that that you disagree with or just don't even want to talk about. The third observation that I've had why there are communication failures is the assumption of knowledge. What may be really obvious to one party may not be obvious to the other party. And then these details or key details are skipped over. And the other party is so bewildered and frustrated. So I think it's really important that whoever is speaking take responsibility to kind of give those thorough explanations, just to and also look for clues of confusion. And I know that's been really hard to do in the time of COVID and Zooms. And then the final observation that I've had why I've seen failures in communication is ego, right? Sometimes in a conversation, it becomes more important to be right than to understand what the person is saying. And so it becomes this instance of you waiting to speak versus actively listening, right? And you can't really understand the other person's ideas if you're so concentrated on how to best impose your ideas on that person. And so CARM was created to improve the communications between academics and natural resource managers. In terms of egos, right, academics are notorious for having them. And this cartoon sums up how academics may be perceived by the very natural resource agencies funding their work. And I, before the University of Guam, as Brad mentioned, was this guy down here. Before I earned my PhD, I was officially and employed by academia. I used to work at the Guam Environmental Protection Agency as a GIS analyst. And then I moved over to the Guam Coastal Management Program and was that NOAA Coral Reef Management Fellow. I worked on local action strategies for coral reef protection on Guam. And one of the many tasks I had was to assist our Coral Reef Initiative point of contact, Evangeline Lujan, on the management grants, on the CRI management grants. And this grant was often parsed out to UOG researchers that were studying our coral reef ecosystems. And working at the Guam Coastal Management Program before academia was one of the best things that has ever happened to me. I learned the language of natural resource management. The pace was breakneck fast, and it was really exciting. I mean, there were at least 3 major fires to put out a week, and conveying that pace and the urgency and the information that we needed to our academic partners often resulted in research that took years to complete and was slightly off the mark in terms of what we wanted, whether it was, you know, support for policy or support for initiative. And so when I was a Coral Fellow, one of the perks that I had was funds that were dedicated to professional development. And when I worked with my mentor, and I was exposed to to her world, I was enrolled in the Micronesian Studies program. It really shaped the direction of my first thesis. I looked at attitudes, knowledge, and perceptions of the COFA residents, or the Micronesian immigrants that reside on Guam, and how they felt about our marine protected areas. And I was doing research about a topic that was so connected to my work at GCMP, you know, that human dimension of coral reef protection. And it was research that was really needed to inform why there was such a disproportionate number of violations in our marine protected areas by this specific group of people. And the whole point of doing this was so that we could reduce, you know, these violations and improve the effectiveness of the MPA. And so, you know, after I earned my PhD, I vowed that I wouldn't be one of these professors up here that was really detached and removed from the reality of the state of natural resources. I wanted to do research that would actively assist managers that are my friends and also my professional colleagues. And, you know, so when I became the UOG lead for PI-CASC, it was an opportunity to put forth a program that directly supported natural resource management decision-making. I really wanted to build this bridge between agencies so that we could, you know, co-produce science on equal footing. I understood their language, and now I could teach them the language of academia, so that we could really truly understand each other and have that kind of meaningful communication that meets each other's needs and inquiries. And some of the main features of CARM is the really unique student-manager engagement program. And I'm going to talk about that in my next slide. And then other parts of CARM involve these organized trainings that are requested by natural resource management agencies, particularly in the realms of GIS and remote sensing, and also extension work for natural resource agencies. I think I'm on speed dial for Department of Ag and GCMP in case they have like any inquiries. They can just send me a quick WhatsApp and I can respond readily. It's like I never really left sometimes, but I'm glad to still be in the plane. So I'm going to focus here on CARM's students and the student manager engagement model. So in a standard fellowship, right, in graduate school, students are hired as research assistants by specific faculty to study a very specific question that's related to a grant that faculty person is usually the principal investigator on. Students are university employees. And as university employees, they're also enrolled in a master's program. They usually have limited interaction with the resource agency, and a lot of that communication is usually the responsibility of the faculty PI. CARM, the CARM partnerships model is different because it really targets existing employees of natural resource management agencies. We recruit them to become students while they remain full-time employees, and they work on projects that their agency needs. And those projects that they're working on are translated into research questions for their thesis in academia that they work on for credit, towards this higher degree. And, this idea of how we can communicate, collaborate, and coordinate with resource agencies, right, is one of these tenets of PI-CASC and CARM. And, this program was really geared to make that communication, collaboration, and coordination much more efficient, right? So, I mean, if you think about it, if the resource manager is the student, right, they end up talking to themselves, like you're having a conversation in your own head, versus, the academia versus resource management. It's now one and the same person. So how does it work? Well, first, PI-CASC, we scout resource agencies for existing managers and employees that may want to advance. Fortunately, I have a really close relationship and a great network with the resource agencies on Guam. And it's important to recognize that while these employees, want to be promoted, they may need higher degrees of higher learning, and they can't just quit their job, right, and then take on like a research assistantship. I mean, that's a drastic pay cut, and they usually have families to support. So we work out a deal with their boss so that they work on a project for work. It's in their scope of work plan. And they can also attend classes during work hours as sort of professional development. So they're getting paid, to go to school, like much like a research assistant, that they get paid to go to school and work on their thesis, but they keep their jobs. And these are some of the agencies that we work with. We work with the Guam Department of Agriculture, Division of Aquatic and Wildlife Resources, the Forestry Division, the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, the Guam Coastal Management Program, Guam Historic Preservation Office, Bureau of Statistics and Plans. And we also work with federal agencies as well, like the NOAA National Weather Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Oh, I forgot NOAA Fisheries here. The Nature Conservancy, U.S. Geological Survey, and the U.S. Forest Service. And I'm probably forgetting a couple, and I apologize for that. That's totally inadvertent. The second step in CARM is after we identify individuals that would be really good candidates for the program, we assist them in selecting an appropriate academic program at the university. And then we look at some of the proposed projects that they have to do for work and which one would best translate into, say, research question. And then we also kind of help map out the courses that they should take to fulfill their degree, as well as assist them in their thesis. And the UOG degree programs that are available are a Master's of Science in Sustainability, Agriculture, Food and Natural Resources, a Master's of Science degree program in Environmental Science. We have a Master's of Science program and an undergraduate program in Biology, and we have a Master's program in Micronesian Studies. And on the undergraduate side, we have Bachelor's of Science in Agricultural and Life Sciences, Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, Bachelor of Arts in Communications. So there are others, but these are some of the main master's degree programs is what you see here. And then finally, we help track the student during their career. We have, monthly check-ins, sometimes weekly check-ins, to make sure that they are, working on their projects at a steady pace, maintaining their bibliographies, getting enough resources. And then students finish with a higher degree eventually. And this is building technical capacity directly within the respective agencies. They have master's degrees, they can be promoted, and they too can become these translators between science and academia and advocate for the resource agency. And I am so pleased to introduce my cohort, my first cohort, Patrick Healer. He's working on his Master's of Science degree in Sustainability, Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources. And he is currently employed with the Bureau of Statistics and Plans and the Department of Agriculture as a watershed coordinator. The next person is CJ Paulino. He is a candidate for the Master's of Science program in environmental science. And he's currently a research associate in the Micronesia Area Research Center, which fits more of that traditional student track. But he's also a volunteer for the Urban Forestry program at the Department of Agriculture. And we also have Maribel Kanata, who is working on our Master's of Arts in Micronesian Studies, and she is currently employed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a park ranger. And our lone undergraduate PI-CASC scholar, Farron Tyron, he is majoring in agricultural and life sciences, and he is currently employed by the Nature Conservancy as a conservation coordinator for the Southern Guam watersheds. And in his free time, he likes to volunteer to do environmental cleanups, which he can talk about. And so now these scholars are also going to give these lightning presentations, so that way you can kind of see that link, that direct tie to management, which is sort of the ethos of CARM. Maribel Kanata is our first CARM scholar, but she can't be here today. She's out sick with flu-like symptoms and currently quarantining in the south of Guam. But Maribel is looking at the social equity in natural resource management on Guam. She's done extensive education and outreach, and one of the things that she observed was, it's sometimes not very equitable for the community whose resources that agencies are managing. So she's going to be looking at how that community was engaged in the past, what kind of efforts and activities were there, how they benefited the community, and then, with a critical eye, really look at how this involvement can be much more meaningful and equitable. And she's going to be using a comparative case study method, looking at two different watersheds that did pretty much the same activities, except for one novel activity in one watershed, which was a fire stipends program. And unfortunately, Maribel can't be here today, so that was her project in about 10 seconds. So the next person that's going to be presenting is Farron Tyron, his lightning talk. And Farron is actually working with PICASC on a federally funded project, Climate Change, Variability, and Drought in the US API, working with managers to mitigate the impacts of drought and wildfire. So with Christine Farron, who's the chief of forestry at the Department of Agriculture, and I'm the counterpart at UOG, we are working with Farron so he can look at the perceptions of wildfire and wildfire management on Guam under this bigger umbrella project. Take it away, Farron.
All right, half a day. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, thumbs up. Awesome. All right. Half a day. Go out and see Farron Tyron. I am an undergraduate student majoring in agriculture and life sciences at the University of Guam. In my full-time work, I'm a conservation coordinator with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm going to talk about some key findings from our study on perceptions of wildfire and wildfire management. Can I just point and then you change the slide? All right, cool. This study came about through a grant with Dr. Abby Frazier and others on drought and wildfire, and with Christine, Chief Christine from Guam Forestry, who's in the chat, with a focus on the wildfire aspect across all of Guam. In my role with TNC, I've worked with forestry on their restoration efforts and have done lots of outreach myself in general, including on wildfire. I like this. My research question is simply, what do residents think about wildfire on Guam? For some background, Christine at Forestry really wanted to know what people's levels of knowledge of wildfires like, especially considering the years of effort put into outreach and restoration. So answering this question has direct application importance in informing further outreach and management strategies. My methods include surveys and interviews, the instruments of which were approved by UOG's internal review board. The survey garnered 189 viable responses, which was convenience and snowball sampled. There were actually over 200 responses, but I had to throw some out after cleaning the data in Excel. And then I used SPSS for data analysis, which we'll get to shortly. The interviews included a key informant who was a cultural practitioner and lifelong resident of Southern Guam, and an expert interview with someone from Guam Forestry. The survey asked residents how they think wildfires are started. As you can see, the graph is much heavier on the right, which is a good thing. It means that residents at least know that most wildfires are caused by people, but still only a minority, at just 30%, know that wildfires are 100% human caused. And that 100% number comes from Guam Forestry, and it's the only fully correct answer to this question. We also looked at how age group, level of education, and region of residence on Guam plays a factor, but still no subset of respondents had a majority with the best answer. We wanted to see how people think wildfire affects the environment. We have three groups here representing North, Central, and South of parts of Guam. The light blue columns indicate respondents who think wildfire is very bad for soil health. And even here, while no group achieves a majority with the best answer, every group does have a majority that says wildfire is bad overall if we add the light blue very bad and dark green somewhat bad columns together. And just as a point of comparison, the little dark brown columns there indicate the few respondents who think wildfire is very good for soil health. The key informant interviewee, the key informant interviewee said he heard burning was good for soil health because it reintroduces nutrients back into the soil, but he was skeptical of this claim. According to the expert interviewee, by definition, wildfire is bad, period, on Guam, and that such uncontrolled burns kill the microbial network in the soil, among other negative effects. We asked residents how they think wildfire affects reef health, and thankfully every group by region has a majority that recognizes it's very bad for reef health. And again, we're looking at those light blue columns. In other good news, not a single respondent answered that they thought wildfire is very good for reef health. In this case, we can see a slight trend that increases in accuracy as we head north to south, which makes sense since they have so much accessible coastline and you can see the water from the road. Moving on to questions about people. The survey asked if you or someone you know has had property damage from wildfire. Surprisingly, only 67% of respondents answered no. I expected more people to be unaffected by fire, and I certainly did not expect the third of respondents who answered yes. Admittedly, there may be a selection bias here where people who have been affected by wildfire were more likely to respond to the survey. We asked respondents who answered yes to elaborate on the damage, and you can see some comments on the right there. There's some common themes with people losing their canopies / tents and crops on their farms. I added all the estimated damages and got $32,000 from just 7% of respondents, which in this particular sample is only 14 people. Here we asked respondents if they or someone they knew required medical care related to wildfire. 1% of respondents said they had to see a doctor for smoke inhalation injuries, which is the expected medical issue as opposed to direct burns. Fortunately, there's also some factors there with the elderly and people on asthma or who have asthma. As wildfire is 100% caused by people, we thought we'd ask if there is a cultural component to its use. Looking at just those who reported to be at least part Chamorro or Guamanian, a 56% majority of respondents said that wildfire is not at all part of their culture. Conversely, 23% of Chamorros ranged from answers very little to very much that wildfire is part of our culture. According to the key informant, he said he wasn't sure. He could think of a couple of uses for wildfire, which include clearing land and for hunting deer, but wasn't quite sure he could call those part of our culture. Moving on, we asked respondents to check any and all agencies they think regularly fight wildfire. Not who should, but who actually do. The survey included a list of the above agencies as well as a write-in section. Predictably, a 90+% majority chose the Guam Fire Department. Less predictably, 35% of respondents chose Guam EPA. They do not fight wildfire. And amazingly, just over half of respondents were aware that forestry fights fire and they have a firefighting operation. A few people even wrote in Guam forestry, so that was awesome. We asked people if they've seen any outreach or on wildfire, and a 71% majority said yes, ranging from a little to a lot. We asked those people who said yes how they got their information, and the top 3 ways were from in-person outreach, social media, and news media. And on the note of media, just to round things off, in addition to my studies and professional role, I like to do extreme cleanups around the island with my friends. And my personal volunteering and environmental advocacy combined with my work experience doing this study and being a PI-CASC scholar has been an incredibly synergistic experience in my life. Just as a quick example, so much so I've been asked to do a voiceover on a local radio public service announcement to talk about wildfires with results that were informed by this study. So that's a nice little thing I'll get to do because of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farron, for that awesome presentation. The next PI-CASC scholar on the menu is CJ Paulino. Go ahead, CJ.
Off it, everybody. Can you all hear me? All good? Okay. So Hafaday, my name is CJ Paulino, and I'm a graduate student and CARM fellow at the University of Guam. I'm also a volunteer with the Guam Department of Agriculture's Urban Forestry program, and I'll be presenting my thesis project on the fungal ecology of Ifa in State by Juga, a culturally iconic tree species to the Mariana Islands. So my project primarily took place within Guam on the southeastern coast in a region called the Asaniti Ridge. It's on private land, which is one of the main areas that Guam Forestry is trying to impact to extend their forestry services beyond what we see at publicly owned property. So in addition to being able to conduct research on private land, it's very special to me because it's right pretty much in my backyard. As you can see, my house is right where the star is. So pretty much what happens here has an immediate effect on my livelihood, and I'm also just grateful to get the chance to conduct research here so close to home. And my project in particular aims to take the first step in determining if a low diversity forest dominated by Ifa, which seems to be particularly abundant in my study site, occurs on Guam. This high Ifa abundance is different from the rest of the island, where the species tends to be rare or uncommon. So a low diversity tropical forest is a rare phenomenon in which a single taxa, such as the species of Decimbi, which is the left image in Guyana, or a whole family, the Dipterocarpaceae family, comprises more than 80% of the canopy composition. This is different from what we typically think of tropical forests, which have high plant diversity in a small area, so such as the Amazon rainforest. Here's a picture of the forest in Barro Colorado Island in Panama, which holds 350 species in their 50-hectare plot. And one unifying characteristic that is shared among all of these low diversity tropical forests is that they all form this symbiosis with a special fungi called the exomycorrhizal fungi. And this fungi only associates with 3% of plants' taxa. So, and if you didn't know, mycorrhizal fungi are symbiotic organisms that associate with plants. So plants provide carbon that they produce from photosynthesis, and in return, their fungal symbiotes provide limiting nutrients like phosphorus, nitrogen, some water, and a bit of pathogen protection. So bringing our focus back to the Ifa tree, I initially began to pursue this question when I observed a plethora of Ifa trees, saplings, and seedlings during the early exploratory stages of my graduate career. So upon further review of the literature, I found a few articles confirming their association with this rare symbiotic fungi. And after talking to my advisors, they pushed me to study this possibly undocumented ecosystem in the Pacific. In addition to its ecology and overall beauty as one of our bigger trees, it's a culturally iconic species to the Mariana Islands. It's known for its dark, termite-resistant wood and is the choice species for local carvers and was the main timber product during the Spanish era to construct those Spanish mamposteria style homes during the 19th and 20th century. So a good example of that is what you see in the top left image with that has EFIT railings, EFIT stairs. I'm pretty sure the flooring in this house is all of the EFIT tree. So next slide. So to determine if EFIT is dominant in my site, I split my project into 3 objectives. First, I want to estimate the community composition, and which is to understand the relative abundance of EFIT compared to other species. Next, I want to confirm if EFIT are present, and if so, identify those fungi to, next I want to confirm if this exomycorrhizal fungi are present, and if so, I want to identify them to their lowest taxonomic form. And lastly, I want to analyze biotic pressure, specifically pathogens and herbivorous fungi, in order to determine the relative diversity of pressure that these seedlings encounter. So this third objective, So this third objective can also indicate both its fitness and abundance in the community. So here's some preliminary data for the abundance of adult trees. EFIT, which is highlighted in red, came in second, but I have not accounted for basal area. So the first and the most abundant tree species, the stems barely get over a foot in diameter, but EFIT can get up to 4 feet in diameter. So that may be able to produce different results and favor EFIT. And for seedling abundance, EFIT did come in second compared to in the entire forest. But I have other objectives, and we'll see how all the data collects, and I'll be able to see what the whole picture is. So aside from the direct outcomes of my thesis project, I am most excited to share the methodology of my third objective, which can be advantageous to citizen science projects and may be part of PI-CASC research products that I saw on their website. With the only materials that you need for this is a smartphone camera and the scale. You can document percent herbivory using free and open source Leaf Bite software, and also document insect and herbivore diversity with the leaf damage analysis protocol. So these methods are well documented and have a short learning curve. And coming from a non-entomologist myself and a non-plant pathologist, they're a lot easier than collecting insects in the field and raising fungi in the lab for identification. So this can be even more powerful when documented over time to see temporal effects due to climate change, invasive species, typhoons, and other stressors on plant-insect interactions. Next slide. And in addition to the contributions to citizen science, I think that my project has a lot of potential for to show the importance of microbes, especially mycorrhizal fungi, on habitat conservation, restoration, and adaptation to stress. Second, I think I hope to identify the major mycorrhizal symbiotes for EFIT, which can be potentially added as a soil amendment for to help EFIT thrive or survive better in disturbed environments, such as this EFIT planting after a forest fire. And ultimately, I want to highlight the role of mycorrhizal fungi in carbon sequestration. One cool aspect of these low diversity exomycorrhizal forests is that they hold more carbon in the soil than high diversity mycorrhizal forests. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty with it, but yeah, it's a really cool feature. And I think it'll be a great part of Guam's role in sequestering carbon and improving our carbon budget. And lastly, so some of these impacts can also be the contributions I mentioned before can also be applied to Department of Ag, but I want to add that my project also I want to emphasize the collaboration between academia, private landowners, or academia, resource managers, and private landowners. For example, I took members of the Guam Plant Extinction Prevention Program into my site. So it was a group of 7 guys, and we did a whole survey of the area. We did a whole survey there to find how many endangered and rare species there are in my uncle's property. And then I took some specialists who have experience with insects, and we did a quick survey of for the Mariana 8-spot butterfly, which we have a plethora of Procris pedunculata, which is the image on the right. So this plant is one of 2 species that are the only hosts for this rare and endangered butterfly, and it's everywhere in my site. So we haven't found any 8-spot butterfly yet, but there's still a lot of ground to cover. So altogether, my uncle who owns a property wouldn't have been able to do this and get access to this knowledge without me bringing in the resources and expertise to look at it. And lastly, I get a master's degree, which benefits everybody. So thank you, and Nsizus Moxie, to everyone in PICASC for allowing me to do research in my backyard. And yeah.
Thank you so much, CJ. And then that was a great presentation. And last and certainly not least is Patrick Keeler. And in the interest of time, I know Patrick can get through his presentation fairly quickly. And thank you again, CJ. Go ahead, Patrick.
All right, good morning, everyone. Let's rock through this. I'm going to be presenting on my thesis project titled Evaluating the Effects of Biochar on Seedling Health and Survivorship in Southern Guam Soils. Next slide, please. I have 2 project goals. One is to modify existing Government of Guam reforestation practices by testing soil remediation techniques at existing reforestation sites in the south of Guam. I'm also hoping to increase forestry projects' resiliency to climate change by improving outplanted species resistance to drought by introducing and testing techniques that aid in overall plant health and survivorship. A quick overview of the project area. My project will take place in the Manel portion of the Manel-Gayas watersheds located in Mycorrhizal, which is the southernmost village of Guam. This watershed was designated as a habitat blueprint area over 5 years ago by NOAA. It was designated as such because it's home to a number of important natural resources, such as mafuti, which is a culturally important fish food species. It houses turtle nesting grounds. It's a large fishing community for the island. It has both seagrass beds and mangroves, and is also home to a bird sanctuary and one of the 5 marine preserves found throughout the island. So all of these natural resources are threatened by a variety of issues, but the one my project focuses most on is erosion. Erosion in the area is exacerbated by invasive species such as bamboo, feral ungulates, fires, which, as Farron pointed out already, all of which are human set. There's off-roading and other human activity, which contributes sediment to our nearshore coastal waters. And all of these put together result in a negative impact to water quality. So my project hopes to address this with biocharcoal. What exactly is biocharcoal? Biochar is a carbon-rich product when biomass such as wood, manure, or crop residue is heated in a closed container with little to no oxygen at very high temperatures, like 600 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. It has a number of important uses for natural resource managers. It can help with improving water quality, as I stated, reduce soil emissions of greenhouse gases, reduce nutrient leaching. And for my project, the latter 2 characteristics are the most important, at least for me, which it can improve acidic soils and even reduce irrigation requirements. The soils in the south are very acidic and have heavy aluminum content. And they also the reduction of irrigation is very important because during our dry season, we have very little precipitation. And also with the oncoming of climate change, our precipitation patterns are supposed to be less predictable. So having more of a buffer in between irrigation needs is going to be very important in the future. Biochar for this study was purchased from an off-island, no, you can go to the next slide, from an off-island contractor, and will be tested, will be subjected to the same tests as our soil samples. The 2 species I chose are acacia and nara. The Acacia auriculaformis is currently used the most by Guam Forestry for reforestation in our savanna sites because it acts as a nurse tree species, it's resistant to fire, and it can outcompete the fast-growing savanna grasses. Nara, in theory, is capable, or has all of these characteristics as well, but is actually endemic to Micronesia. Not necessarily Guam, although Fosberg does state that it was found here a long time ago, so it could be, but we're also introducing it because we're trying to reduce the creation of monosands in our reforestation practices as well. Next slide, please. So the project site itself is located at the Escada reforestation site. This is a 100-acre landscape scale restoration project, which, as I stated, is mostly primarily acacia due to the majority of the landscape being savanna grasses. There is interspersed erosion control and native outplantings throughout. And for the project, I've identified 2 savanna and 2 badland plots for this work. So the 4 plots that have been identified for the experiment, we'll be doing 9 samples taken from each of these plots. I'm sorry for the illustration, but those are supposed to be equidistant throughout the square. But on the right, you can see the image. As I stated, there's supposed to be 9 samples equidistant throughout the plot. Each of these samples will be made into a composite sample and then be subjected to both pH testing, organic carbon via the wet oxidation method, and then we'll also be testing for the cation exchange capacity. These soil samples and biochar samples will be tested at both the UOG lab as well as a contractor at the a soil lab in Florida. Next slide, please. So quick overview of the nursery methodology. All of our seeds are propagated in dibble tubes during the early months of the dry season. The seedlings are fertilized with water-soluble triple 20 fertilizer at a rate of 1 tablespoon to 2 gallons once a week. And then we also have an irrigation system that waters them 3 times a day. As for the site prep itself, we get rows measuring 3 feet wide that are cleared and follow the contour of the land to reduce sediment erosion. You can see an example of this on the left in that image. Each of these rows are spaced 6 feet apart. And then we also glyphosate in between the rows when new growth comes in before we do our outplantings, so that the outplanted vegetation will have a better chance of competing against the fast growing savanna grasses. As for the fire breaks, we create these around our reforestation sites. We've learned from the past that these are necessary, especially within the first couple years. But our fire breaks are 20 feet wide with a 1 foot scrape down the middle to bare soil. And then we also use badland areas as existing natural fire breaks as well. This was one of the reasons that we chose our site, is because it is maintained by Guam Forestry for fire breaks, which will help protect the plants. So the planting occurred in November of 2021. We had acacia Nara seedlings planted, not using dibble bars, I'm sorry, but with the shovels in an auger. Our seedlings were planted such that the top of the root ball is level with the soil. They're all spaced 6 feet apart. And we fertilize, for our fertilization method, we do 2 holes made 6 inches upslope with about 25 grams of 1616 fertilizer in each of the holes. Next slide. Please skip this slide. There we go. So this is the layout of the plots. It was done with a randomization on a computer. You'll see that there are 4 treatments. There's a standard practice of what forestry already does, which is 50 grams of fertilizer, no biocharcoal. And then we did a standard practice for Nara, which is the same treatment, 50 grams of fertilizer, no biocharcoal. And then for our next 2, we did biochar treatment of 1 kilogram of biocharcoal, but with the same fertilizer treatment as well. That way we could see the effect that biocharcoal has on both the Nara and acacia. Next slide, please. And this is just a layout of the badland test plots as well. Next slide. So our hypothesis is that the 2 outplanted species, or the null hypothesis is that the 2 outplanted species will not show any significant difference in their survival with the addition of biocharcoal, as opposed to the alternative that biocharcoal will, show significantly higher survival than that without. And then our other null hypothesis is that the addition of biocharcoal to outplanted vegetation will have no measurable effect on outplanted trees' stem diameter and height, whereas opposed to the addition of biocharcoal will have a significant difference on outplanted tree stem diameter and height. So for monitoring, we're going to be doing quarterly monitoring of the site. The metrics we'll be looking at are stem width and height, as well as mortality. Stem width will be measured with calipers where the stem meets the ground, and the stem height will be measured with a meter stick from ground level to stem tip. And then the monitoring will occur for this project itself, 1 full dry and rainy season, but for the full life of the project, it'll be a 3-year data collection. Next slide, I think. Yeah, and then here are my references, and then that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for that presentation. Way to rock through that. Thank you all, PI-CASC CARM scholars, for presenting. We can take any questions. I didn't even look at the chat yet.
Yes, please, we have a couple of questions in the chat. Please feel free to chime in or add more. But before that, please join me in a round of applause, virtual or real applause, for Romina, Farron, CJ, and Patrick. Thank you so much for being with us. Okay, so some of the questions in the chat. I saw one from Heather Kirkring from PI-CASC. Let me move up to that real quick. Heather, I'll read it, or you're welcome to jump in and just say a question if you want to, of course.
Oh, sure, I don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to get the updates from Guam and how the projects are going. I guess I was thinking about this during Farron's presentation, and you guys shared the web app, which was great to see where wildfires have occurred in the past, and just more wondering about how you're looking at drought forecasts or any precipitation forecast, and thinking about how that will impact wildfire in the future.
Yeah, so for my work, I'm actually really more focused on the human aspect of it. So engaging with the communities and just kind of listening to the scientists who are looking at those types of things directly.
Great.
If
Yeah,
that
good
makes
job,
sense.
Farron. I didn't know if anybody else too, anyone is welcome to obviously jump into that, but
Yeah, Christine or Romina would be better. Almost anyone else but me.
Romina, wasn't there like a 50-year forecast of like a overall decrease in precipitation?
Yeah, so there was work done, I think, by Steve Gingrich out of the entity in USGS, I believe. I don't remember his affiliation, but he was working with Vicki Keener, and they were looking at freshwater resources on Guam. And one of the findings that they had was that they were foreseeing, and the downscale model also says this, that they were seeing a drier wet season and a slightly wetter dry season, and a lot of the aquifer recharge happens in that wet season, if you will. So, but the basic overall trend is a drying for Guam, which has implications on fire.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, folks. I see another question from Patrick Grady. Happy to read it, Patrick. If you want to chime in, go ahead. And
yeah, I can chime in.
thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, my question, I asked two questions, and they they focus on the data that was used in the web map that was shared, as well as the data that cool looking leaf bite app collects. And my question is, first part of the question is, that wildfire data set, was that processed on using desktop software like ArcPro or something, and then served to ArcGIS Online? And then my second question is, can you actually use other applications to consume the data that the leaf bite app is collecting for you?
So Christine Farron here. I'm not stealing your show, just that I threw the fire map in there. The creators, Julian Dendy, USDA Forest Service, IPIF contractor. Julian's been mapping our fires for those several years, and he uses satellite imagery for that. Not all fires. I'll actually put his notes for the web app on there, because he knows, much to Romina's irritation, that I don't speak map all the time. So I'm gonna put it in the chat for you guys.
Great. Yeah,
For your
just
second question,
I get asked often about, access to data, and so just knowing whether or not the data is, potentially available to be, shared in other applications is always good to know. So go ahead. Sorry, Charles, you started to answer the second part.
no problem. But the second question, I think the app that you can track your location with your phone. But actually, Romina and I were talking about doing another project, since I have location data connected to each of my samples with the Trimble. It's even more accurate, and we're talking about doing like a spatial analysis of, like, do certain parts get hit with herbivory more than other parts. It's a really small scale project, a small scale area, but yeah, if you want to have it widely adopted, you can use your phone, and there's a feature on LeafBite to, I believe there's a feature on LeafBite that you can put in your location and the percent herbivory of these plants. That's really cool. You can do like edge effects, like maybe the edge of the forest gets hit harder with certain herbivores than the interior part of the forest. So yeah, that's what I think would happen.
And this would be after you finish your thesis project,
Yes,
and get your
yes.
master's degree, and then this would be
Yes.
after that, right? Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, it's all after. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. We're a little past the hour. I don't know if, hopefully our team, Romina and team, would be happy to stay on a few more minutes if there's remaining questions. I do want to get a couple reminders in for everybody on before folks start jumping off if they need to. Please do take a couple minutes to complete the survey as you log off. This will help us again in planning for future PICASC, Slice of PICASC seminars and other events. We also hope you'll join us at our next Slice of PICASC seminar, which will be on Tuesday, February 1 in Hawaii dates, where we'll hear from Dr. Ryan Peroy in the Department of Geography at UH Hilo. We'll be talking about Big Island, Big Coastline, generating a shoreline inventory for Hawaii Island to increase resilience in the face of rising sea levels. So please look out for email reminders and sign up information for that event coming soon, or visit our PI-CASC website. Any other questions? I didn't see anything else in the chat. Maybe I need to look one more time. If you have questions, please chime in. I think we can stay on for a few more minutes. Folks don't mind.
Happy to stay on for a few more minutes. And also too, if you have any inquiries about CARM and you want to participate in the program, please reach out to me. At my email address is roking@triton.uog.edu, and John Borja will be releasing application forms for this now very official program.
Romina, maybe I can ask a question while we're waiting for any others. So I know the CARM name is pretty new. How long has the program been going? And how big of a geographic area have you been able to pull students from? Is it just Guam or beyond?
So mostly Guam, and this is a very, very new program. And, you know, as of last year, it didn't even have a name. It was just, you know, how we had approached, the co-production of science, and how we can better engage our natural resource manager partners. And me, you know, being a mom, I'm all about efficiency. I'm like, what if the natural resource manager is the students? There we go, direct engagement there. And again, I couldn't have done all of this without my colleagues and my friends in the natural resource community. They're just awesome to work with, and I'm really happy that I could further support their mission at UOG.
Well, it's such a cool program, such a cool model that I hope we can build on, borrow from elsewhere. So not hearing or seeing other questions, I think we'll go ahead and end. Thank you again to Romina, Farron, CJ, and Patrick for joining us today. Wonderful, very informative presentation, and we hope to see all of you at our next Slice of PI-CASC seminar in February with Dr. Ryan Peroy.
Thank you again, Brad, for having us. We really enjoyed being here. I did. I'm a little hyped up on caffeine right now and lack of sleep. But thanks so much, Brad, and we look forward to the next slices of pie.
Yeah, our pleasure. Have a good day, everybody.